Well, I'm glad you're doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, we appreciate having you on. Blues and Chaos, the music writing of Robert Palmer. It's kind of sad to have to compile a man's work before, really, he died before his time, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Bob was only 52 when he died, so yeah, he had plenty more stuff that he could have been doing. I mean, it's extraordinary, and it's amazing, however, to think of how much stuff he did in the course of his life. But there's no question. I mean, Bob lived like a musician. He was a critic. He was a musician, but he was also a critic and a journalist, and but he kind of lived the life, and in many ways paid a price for it. But and part of that price was kind of getting cut down early. He had terrible liver problems, and at the end of his life, a number of us were trying to raise money for a transplant for him. He was, I mean, as many people are in this world, he had no insurance, and it's, the scandal of not really having a national health plan. It was left to individuals to try to raise that money, and, which we were doing, but we kind of ran out of time, unfortunately.
And in 1997, there wasn't any music cares, was there?
There was. I mean, that's a whole other issue, but, he was not enrolled in it. I mean, there were subsequent scandals connected with music cares, which I think have been cleared up because one of the things I did was, various people asked me to write obituaries and things like that when Bob died, and I, donated, a part of that money to Music Cares, somewhat to my chagrin later. But no, I mean, Music Cares is doing a much better job now of attending to musicians and other people in the music industry, who need medical help. But it wasn't doing such a great job back then.
Well, things go through growing pains. It's just great. It's too bad, Anthony. We're talking to Anthony DeCurtis, who is the editor of the music writings of Robert Palmer. What I'm going to say, Anthony, is it's too bad that we can't just distill the brain. If we're going to lose the person, if we could get the brain and the memory somehow, put in a crystalline box.
Well, I think that's what the writing is about. And the other thing about Bob, I mean, a lot of it was personality. Not that he was a particularly flamboyant individual, but Bob's voice. I mean, he had this great accent. He grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and for somebody who was as extremely well informed and educated and kind of intellectually ambitious as he was, he spoke in this very slow drawl, and it made his storytelling so compelling. I mean, I remember my conversations with him as powerfully as I remember a lot of his writing. I think that, but what the best of what Bob did is, I think, in the work, it comes across very powerfully. And I should say, not only in this collection, not only in Blues and Chaos, but, in his book Deep Blues, which to this day, I think, is the best book about the Delta Blues. I mean, that was music, that Bob deeply loved and managed to convey with a tremendous amount of power.
Now, you were both editors. You're still an editor. Did you edit each other's work at any point?
I edited Bob. Bob was a contributing editor, which generally means that, you're kind of, you're on the masthead, you're part of the family, you do a certain amount of work. And at various points, I mean, he used to be, very early on in the early 70s, he was a jazz columnist at Rolling Stone. I mean, one of the things about Bob is he was a musical polymath. I mean, he wrote about jazz, he wrote about world music, he wrote about avant-garde classical music, and he wrote about the blues and rock and roll. And so, he covered the waterfront musically. But when I was an editor at Rolling Stone, I was editing the review section when I was full-time on staff. Bob was essentially the first writer I tracked down. I don't think it's any mystery. Bob had, drug problems in his life and tended to disappear for, considerable lengths of time. I mean, I mean, one of the jobs in many ways in the last, in the years that Bob and I knew each other, I sort of became the person who could locate him. A lot of people, most for good reasons, some not so good reasons, were, often seeking him out, and I, pretty much could find him whenever I needed to. But, I was his editor, essentially in the last, 8 or 10 years of his life at Rolling Stone.
That's amazing. So that gives you an even clearer picture of how to put a book like this together.
Yeah, I mean, although, I've done books like this for me, and, the mistakes that you make in your own behalf, I mean, you're never happy about them, but, you realize why you did them and, the risks that you're taking and that sort of thing. I found myself very self-conscious putting together a book of Bob's work because, I mean, in many ways we were very different people. I mean, my own tastes, while they overlap with Bob's in certain ways, diverge from his in other ways. And I didn't particularly feel like, everybody's got their own version of people. And I felt like my version of Bob, what I wanted in many ways was a bigger readership for him. But in a lot of ways, Blues and Chaos is the book. I mean, I tried to be conscious of the kind of things that Bob would have wanted to see in there. I don't think it's necessarily the book he would have done, but it's close enough. I was dealing with a publisher. I got him a very good publisher in Scribner. I think it's a house that has a long, storied literary reputation, and I think he would have been proud to be part of that. The book was very beautifully done in hardcover, and the paperback looks terrific too. I wanted to present him in a big way. I think, Bob was, I think often willing to kind of, comb the edges a bit in both in terms of his musical taste and in terms of his lifestyle. And I suppose I wanted to bring him to the center of the stage, and that might reflect my own taste maybe more than his. But I guess I felt like, why do this if you're not going to win him a new audience? And so that was part of my goal. So it was tricky. It was trickier than doing something for me. I mean, I felt like I wanted it to represent him, but I also wanted it to, I don't know, maybe do some things for him that he might not have necessarily done for himself.
Now, there are people who read Rolling Stone and the old Cream magazine and even the old Hit Parade religiously, so they would know the difference between this Robert Palmer and the singer Robert Palmer.
I hope so. I mean, you'd be surprised. I think that, I'm often asked, and look, it's not like critics are national figures, and
exactly.
Certainly, they are to a coterie of people, but, Robert Palmer had big hits. I mean, I like Robert Palmer, to be honest with you.
Well, he was great.
I don't have a problem with it, but it's something that it causes a certain amount of confusion, and, whenever I'm, writing a little bio for myself or trying to get this book out there, I always take great care to say the music critic Robert Palmer, and certainly when I'm talking about him, I always refer to, everybody referred to him as Bob, and I try to say Bob Palmer, which makes it clear, you're not talking about the guy with, the beautiful girls in the mini dresses dancing behind him.
Well, the sad statement on today is that, I try to explain very respectfully to a Mark Farner or to a Marty Ballin that the kids today don't even realize who Grand Funk or Jefferson Airplane were and are. And so for them, as the solo artists, Marty Ballin, Mark Farner, they don't have the name that they had 30 years ago.
Well, that's true. And, it's a funny thing because, I think the culture in a lot of ways is, a lot more confusing. In ways that are good and ways that are bad, than it used to be. Because, certainly anybody these days who wants to find out who the Jefferson Airplane or the Jefferson Starship were, can do that in 3 seconds
exactly.
Online. It was certainly different, when you had to go scurry around and look at books and, go to the library or go to the bookstore, and if you weren't living in a town with a sophisticated bookstore, you were kind of stuck. And, you go in to search for used records and all this other stuff. And I mean, all that stuff was great fun, by the way, and lent for a sense of discovery that typing in a name and doing a Google search, convenient as it is, really doesn't have the same kind of kick.
But it's a double-edged sword, Anthony.
If they're interested, but it's so it's available, but it's also it also kind of seems less significant. When you had to really go on the hunt, these things seemed very important. When they're kind of instantly available to you, maybe they seem less so, I think, to young people.
Maybe to the young people, but when I go searching for Mitch Ryder's "Give Me Shelter" 45 on Paramount Records,
yes,
and can't find it, and then I can go into eBay and find it. After years of searching, it's kind of it's very satisfying to get it in the mail finally.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, if you're looking for the actual thing, by all means, if you can listen to it probably online somewhere. But yeah, if you want the actual thing, I mean, and that's that in itself is a kind of old school taste. I mean, it certainly is my taste. I want the stuff. I really like. To this day, I'll certainly download music, but when I do, I still don't feel a kind of ownership of it. I find myself when I'm kind of looking through my, my playlists and various downloads, I think, oh, right, I forgot I had that. Whereas that doesn't happen when I have physical CDs or albums.
And Robert Palmer never experienced what we're experiencing now.
Yeah, I know. I sometimes wonder what he would have made of it.
I'm sure there'd be an essay or two, but so we're getting to look at his music writing from a prism that's not, let's say, encumbered by downloading it in this kind of silly way of distributing music that just doesn't make it as collectible.
Well, the thing is, Bob was a believer. I mean, as smart and again, as sophisticated a thinker as he was, Bob really did believe in the kind of transcendent or maybe even mystical power of what music could do. And when he would describe a musician like Muddy Waters, or really kind of render what the master musicians of Tijuca and Morocco sounded like. This wasn't, a kind of just passing fancy of his. I mean, he really wanted this music to transport him. And part of that was the look, and part of that was the actual physical thing. There's no question about it. Now, I mean, I think he would have adjusted to whatever reality presented itself. But I think, if anybody was sensitive to these great, the way that LP covers used to have these astonishing portraits, and you would just stare at these images of the Rolling Stones and other groups. Bob certainly, none of that was really lost on him.
Tijuca was brought to the mainstream by Brian Jones, but Robert was aware of the music before Brian Jones made it kind of not popular, but he brought it to our attention.
Well, he went, I'm not sure, I mean, he may have found out. I mean, Bob a little bit moved in those circles of, people like William Burroughs and Brian Geisen, and, who were interested in Moroccan music and interested in the kind of mystical music of the Middle East. And so consequently, I think his understanding of it and awareness of it was roughly contemporaneous with, say, Brian Jones going and tracking it down and doing some recording. I mean, Bob reviewed that record in Rolling Stone, as a matter of fact, when it came out. Bob eventually went to Morocco a few times. I mean, his daughter, Augusta Palmer, made an excellent documentary about his trips to Morocco called The Hand of Fatima. And, Bob, again, was not going there because, it was just a lark. He was going there, to really experience what these musicians were experiencing. And the pieces that he wrote about it are extraordinary. I mean, they're collected in this book, and man, oh man, as a kind of travel writing to the, a travel writing of the mind, a travel writing of consciousness. They're quite something. I mean, they're worth a few minutes of your time to read for sure.
And this would be the Up the Mountain Morocco chapter.
Yeah, exactly.
October 4th, 14th.
There's another one too. Let me look at the.
1971.
There's a whole section on Morocco in the book. Up the Mountain. He wrote then a piece for Rolling Stone talking about doing that piece, and then another piece that was called Into the Mystic, which is Bob revisiting Morocco. Maybe about 20 years after he went the first time, and again, once again, having a very powerful, I guess, spiritual experience.
And again, this book brings something very important back into the mainstream consciousness, because I think even that Brian Jones album is kind of lost to history.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, people ask, this was, I mean, much as I was talking before about wanting to bring Bob's work, into the mainstream in a way, in a lot of ways, this book would have been maybe a bigger media deal if I, just kind of concentrated on all the rock and roll stuff that Bob did. But, he was really interested in all this other music, and I guess I felt, these pieces will find their way out there, to the audience who wants them, and, that may be a large audience, it may be a more smaller, more discerning audience, but I don't necessarily want to. I mean, I guess people say, well, who is the readership for this? I mean, what is the state of music criticism and all these other questions that, quite honestly, I never really think about very much. I mean, what I'm interested in is putting great stuff out there. I mean, when I get a chance to write about things, and certainly when I have the opportunity to bring forward the work of a writer of the caliber of Bob Palmer, what I'm interested in doing is putting it out in the world. That work is good enough. It will do its own work. It will shape the way things are out there. If people are resistant to it or can't find their way to it or, don't care about it, I mean, that's a larger problem. But it's not the problem with this stuff, because this stuff is amazing for anyone who cares to see it.
Oh, yeah, and just, discussion of John Lennon, an interview with Eric Clapton.
Yeah, right. I mean, Bob would, this was one of the great things about talking to Bob. I mean, I remember he wrote the liner notes, which are included here, to a box set by Yoko Ono. And I said, well, did you know Yoko? And he said, oh, yeah, for about the last, year or so of John's life, I was at the Dakota, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. He became very good friends with John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And they listened to music together, Yoko wrote a very nice, kind of endorsement of Bob, for the back cover of this book. She and John were admirers and fans. I mean, Bob was the kind of person who carried himself around musicians as their peer, whether they were Ornette Coleman or they were, John Lennon or they're Bono or they're Mick Jagger. I think Bob felt that his comprehension of music and his love and understanding of music gave him a standing that was equal to these artists. Now you can debate that point, but the quote that's on the cover of this book is by Robbie Robertson talking about Bob Palmer, and he says, "A love of music was more evident in him than in anybody I ever met." Now this is Robbie Robertson talking about anybody he ever met. Now, I mean, that would include Bob Dylan and many, many, many other people. But, Palmer really understood music in the most visceral ways and in the most intellectual ways, and was able to convey that full package, both why it's important and why it feels so good. That was his great gift.
The beautiful thing, what you've done with this book, is you have a nice cross-section I love the Velvet Underground, of course. So for me, I hone in on that. But then there's everything else, and you just touch upon so many different chords here. It's amazing.
Well, it's, I felt that responsibility I felt. I mean, that was the thing I finally wanted to do, is really pull together the range of what Bob did. A friend of mine, the music writer, Ira Robbins, once said about Bob, he goes, it's as if he strikes this tone in his work don't worry, I know everything. And really, there really was a kind of sense, where it's like Bob is telling you a story, whether he's writing about Philip Glass or he's writing about, Howlin' Wolf, or he's writing about, the Velvet Underground or Patti Smith. I think, Bob had a great ability to narrate, both as a speaker and as a writer. And that's something that also comes through. I mean, when you leave a piece by Bob, you're just on fire with a desire to engage this music.
Now, you've done something here that I've never seen in a book before. You've got liner notes he's written for albums in a book.
Yeah.
Is this something, I've never seen it, and what a great idea for just a full book of liner notes.
Well, I mean, occasionally there are issues with getting the rights to those things. I mean, I've done it in my collections. I always feel like I always have loved liner notes, and honestly, I have to say, in my own career, one of the greatest thrills. I mean, I remember reading liner notes to a live record that Tim Hardin made at Town Hall. And I was, maybe 13 or 14, and thinking like, God, that's so cool. This writer, I think it was Michael Zwerin, got to hang out with Tim Hardin and write these notes, and there was something that was so intimate about it. And the thing about liner notes is, they're in the hands of the people who love the music. If you buy the music, you're into it probably, and so therefore you're addressing an audience of believers, an audience that shares your taste. So I've always really love that opportunity. And I mean, Bob's liner notes are just ridiculously good. I mean, the liner notes in here for Einstein on the Beach, the Philip Glass piece,
I've got it right
extraordinary.
Right in my hands.
Oh, and just one other example. I mean, the Bo Diddley liner notes are sensational. I mean, they just really. I mean, Bob would bristle at the idea that anybody would think that Bo Diddley was kind of a quote-unquote primitive artist, and he breaks down the Bo Diddley beat in such compelling ways to demonstrate, all that's going on in that music, that it's revelatory. I mean, you don't listen to Bo Diddley the same way after reading that essay.
And that's why just collecting this stuff is just so important, at least for me as an archive person. I just got to have this on my shelf. And liner notes in a book, wow. It's easy to read, too.
Well, I mean, I think Bob's writing is very readable. I mean, that's the thing that's great. I mean, it's...
no, I mean, like, just holding it in a nice book.
Oh,
instead
yeah.
Of like,
No, it's very... And, it's all for people who want to download it. It's also available as an ebook. But, they did a very nice job with this book. As a physical object, I'm delighted with it. And I think Bob would have been pleased with it, too.
Well, yeah, the paper, the texture of the paper. You can imagine, Anthony, because you get books to review,
Sure.
Hundreds of books come through, and people don't understand the texture of the paper is different for every single book.
Yeah.
This is very nice.
Yeah. It's very well presented, and deservedly so.
And the layout is good, and that's just important to me, because I read these on the treadmill a lot.
Yeah, I mean, these... there's a lot of stuff in here that, some of it's, Bob could, get up there and, some of it is a little demanding. Other stuff is, very, very, there's a lovely piece about being backstage with Lightnin' Hopkins at a show in New York, a piece that Bob did for the New York Times. Just a really, it's, probably about 1,000 words. Very, very nice portrait. Those things that, these images that really stay with you. But the thing, Bob was a very lucid writer. I mean, that's the thing that is extraordinary. I mean, a lot of people think that if you have kind of big ideas, you have to write in a way that is belabored, whereas really it's quite the opposite. I mean, I think that, the stronger your ideas are, the more clearly you should be able to bring them across, get out of their way and let their power convey itself. And Bob was a master at that.
Do sometimes the demons help get the word out better, or does it detract?
Well, I think that Bob's demons, in many ways, you're never supposed to say this, but, kind of made him a little bit more of a glamorous figure. I mean, there was, when I was coming up, not that Bob was that much older than me, but I started later. And, there were so many stories about Bob, a lot of them when I was out, really promoting this book, people would tell me, this one editor was saying, God, I had to get a manuscript back to Bob, and I went to his apartment in Brooklyn, and I'm banging on the door, and the music was so loud, and finally I just gave up and left it there. And, the next day Bob called me and said, oh, gee, I'm sorry I didn't hear you. You could have come in. Keith Richards was over, and we were listening to, old blues records. Now, whatever else they were doing, we can only imagine about why they couldn't hear the guy in the door in the first place. But, I think, Bob, wanted that thing. He suffered for it, and there's no doubt about it. And there was a kind of self-consciousness, I think, on his part, a kind of secretiveness. I think a lot of junkies have that in the first place. But, I think Bob was a little bit also embarrassed by it. At the same time, I think he knew that, that he was living the life that a lot of musicians lead, for better or worse. And there's no need to sugarcoat it, and there's also no need to deny it. I think that that was the way that he saw himself. Now, it's the furthest thing possible from my life. I think in part that's why we got along. I don't think he needed another, kind of, running buddy in the demi-monde. I think he needed somebody, could, give him work and get it out there and let it be seen, which is, the job I'm trying to continue to do.
Well, I don't know if you know that I worked for years with Jimmy Miller, the late Jimmy Miller.
Oh, my goodness. I did know that, and I had forgotten it, but thank you for reminding me. I knew Jimmy a little bit myself, but talk about your demons and your gifts.
Yes, exactly, and that's the whole balancing act. I saw Al Stewart backstage at the Paradise, and I was talking about Jimmy Miller, and he just looked at me and said, "We all have our crosses to bear."
Well, the thing with Jimmy, man, is that, there, once again, it's just an astonishing body of work.
Absolutely.
You have, all of those great, they're really the greatest records that the Rolling Stones ever made, they made with Jimmy. And, the kind of immortal phrase that Keith used about him, Jimmy was an incredible rhythm man. And, he brought a kind of swing to the Rolling Stones that, Exile on Main Street and, and Let It Bleed and Beggar's Banquet. But, he got sucked up into that world and, also paid a very heavy price for it.
Very, very heavy price. Because
I was in the situation of trying to get Jimmy Miller a ticket to see the Rolling Stones at Shea Stadium. They were doing 7 shows at Shea Stadium. And, Jimmy Miller called me to see if I could, wrangle a ticket for him, which I did by calling Keith Richards' manager and just saying, come on. What are we talking about here? Let's make sure Jimmy gets into one of these shows.
Now, that's so strange because Jimmy knew Jane, and he brought me to a Keith Richards session. And I met Rob Fraboni there. Keith introduced me to Rob Fraboni, and now we're good friends. And that was way back in '88.
Yep.
But that boggles my mind. That,
it certainly boggled mine.
Because Jimmy, he had an open, who knows what transpired, And God bless you for doing that. I appreciate that you got him into the Stones. John Lee Hooker, the name's in here a couple of times, but did he write extensively on John Lee?
Well, he wrote about all those guys. I think Muddy Waters was his primary, his primary guy. He got the phrase deep blues from Muddy. And, from Muddy, I think, just kind of really, explored around it. He just loved, that stuff was right in his wheelhouse. He grew up in Alabama, in Arkansas, and so, right across, you know, right across the river from Memphis, and you know, next door to Mississippi, and there was a, you know, so that music was very much part of his, very much part of his consciousness.
Which Eric Clapton must have appreciated when he chatted with him.
Oh, that Clapton interview is unbelievable.
I'm looking at it right now.
You know, I mean, Clapton's written a book now, you know, and so and a very candid one that's very good. But you know, this interview, certainly at the time it came out, you know, there was nothing like it. You know, as far as Clapton's candor about what his life was like, and both his musical life and his, you know, and his drug use, essentially. And you know, and I mean, that was something, you know, I mean, Bob was able to bring a kind of perspective to that, you know, not many music journalists might have been able to.
No, there's great stuff about many of Clapton's key records.
Yeah. Well, you know, Bob knew all that stuff inside and out. I mean, I don't hesitate to say for a minute that Bob, you know, and I don't think Clapton would deny it, you know, that, you know, Bob knew more about that music than he did, you know. So, you know, he could, you know, certainly go round for round with Eric Clapton.
Just the fact that you have the Clapton interview, the Led Zeppelin liner notes for the box set, and Velvet Underground and John Lennon, I mean, to me, that's, okay, it's a keeper.
Well, you know, it's good to have the stuff in one place, you know?
Exactly. No, because the books accumulate, the records accumulate. Most of us fanatics have walls and walls of CDs and DVDs, and you got to get your hands on it somehow. So now I can grab this book for certain things I need.
Well, and also, you know, you frame it in a different way. You know, I mean, I think the value of the book is that it puts Bob at the center. You know, and so, you know, I mean, it's great to read those notes while listening to the, you know, the Zepp box set. You know, those notes are also terrific. But you know, I mean, this, you know, where you see him moving so gracefully among, you know, so many of the different artists that we've discussed, you know, you just really get a sense of the range of things that he could write in such an authoritative way about.
And you've got Lou Reed and Patti Smith, of course. Is there any Hendrix in here? I didn't stumble on any.
I don't believe so. I mean, you know, Jimi Hendrix was certainly, you know, part of his bag of tricks. I mean, there's only so many pages you've got.
No, I understand that. I'm just, you know, for me, the fan, I'm just, you know, because Jimmy's in the index, of course.
Yeah.
But he certainly must have written about Jimmy.
I would imagine he did.
Cool stuff. Anthony, what are you up to these days other than the paperback edition of this great book?
Well, you know, one of the things I'm doing is finishing up the liner notes for this expanded version of the Rolling Stones' Some Girls, which is going to be coming out in November. And like all things with the Rolling Stones, it's taking a very long time. I'm hoping that, you know, that will be... I mean, the essay has been done, but, you know, getting approvals, and there's revisions and everything else going on, but... you know, hopefully it'll all be done and out. And I was speaking with Keith Richards the other day, who was just raving about, you know, some of the outtakes that they were going to be including. So I'm very excited to hear those.
Which was my next question. Can you tell us what the outtakes are? Because I noticed that they will.
You know, he did not mention any by title, and I haven't been given them.
Because look at Exile on Main Street. I mean, that stuff I've been drooling about getting my hands on for years.
Yeah.
And,
the sense I got from him, and you know, the sense I got from the research I was doing to listen to this. I mean, Keith mentions again, without giving titles, just says, you know, goes, you know, there are a couple of hard country things by Mick, and a few of my own things that I found and that I'd really forgotten about and like very much. So, that certainly whet my appetite.
And to hear Keith excited about a new record.
Absolutely.
And the older material, because we, fans of the Stones, have been just lusting for that, like you said, the vintage stuff, you know, when Jimmy worked with them and when they did this incredible body of work. That's
well, you know, there's this issue. I mean, I think that, you know, that, I mean, I don't know if it will ever get resolved, you know, but, you know, the stuff that Alan Klein and I guess now Jody Klein, you know, owns, and the stuff that the Stones owned, I mean, the breaking point roughly being Sticky Fingers. You know, and I think, you know, there still are, issues there to get all that resolved. But yeah, I mean, God, I mean, to get some outtakes of that very early stuff would be amazing, you know.
I'll tell you a funny story you'll like. You know Midnight Records in New York.
Of course.
So Jimmy and I are in New York. We'd go frequently to talk to the A&R men, and we were there quite a bit. And I found a Joey Steck album produced by Jimmy Miller. I've been searching for it, you know, like 49 cents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Jimmy goes, oh, great. You know, so we buy that. And then Texile on Main Street, you know, which was the bootleg
Yes.
of Exile stuff. So the guy saw us coming, and he slapped $45 on the cover. And I said, well, we got to have this. So Jimmy goes, oh, my God, that's too much money, Joe. I said, no, we got to have this.
Oh, wow.
You know, it was like 1985, 86, right?
Like $100, yeah.
45 bucks for this double disc.
Oh, yeah.
So
well,
Jimmy,
I was figuring inflation.
oh yeah, it's like $100 today. So you know, I slap it on the American Express card. We get home, and I put it on the turntable, Aladdin song. And Jimmy goes, "Oh my God, it's worth every penny. Thank you for picking it up, Joe."
Wow.
I'm the guy who told them not to put that out because it had the Paint It Black riff. I made a mistake.
That's hysterical.
I thought you'd like that.
Very funny.
And years later, look what it just relaunched that album, didn't it?
Yeah, man. I mean, that's amazing. But, you know, I mean, that's a very interesting story, and it's interesting, you know, I mean, it's always great when people are that honest. But one of the things that's intriguing, you know, I mean, Keith said this, because, you know, you listen to so much of this stuff and you go, man, like, why did we not include that? You know, you know, you make the choices that you make, and not to bring this back around to Bob Palmer, but you know, there certainly have been pieces of Bob's that I've read since, you know, since this book came out that have just gone, you know, this is probably better than, you know, maybe 2/3 of the pieces that are in the book, you know. But you know, there are deadlines and there are real world decisions, and things, you know, press on you at the moment that you're trying to figure things out. And I mean, one of the things in the research, you know, that Jagger said about Some Girls was like, essentially, the songs that we finished first went on the record. You know, and finally it just comes down to that.
Wow. Enough. You know, we lose some of these great artists. We just lost Nick Ashford.
Yes.
My dear friend Bobby Hebb a year ago, August 3rd.
Yes, of course.
Awful. And we lose these people, but then when we lose rock writers like Lester Bangs, I only met Lester once. But how do we get them to survive other than, you know, this great book you've done? And are there other rock critics that have not been really given their due and they've passed on that you can think of?
Well, you know, I mean, there are a variety of ones. And, you know, I mean, one of the things now is that it seems like more and more of this stuff, you know, is coming out. And so, you know, there is an audience. You know, I mean, it's, you know, it's often a specialized audience. I mean, I guess one of my hopes is that, you know, this book, that Blues and Chaos, would be, you know, the kind of thing that would get included in, you know, college courses and things like that, you know, people would use it and it would have an ongoing life in that regard. So, you know, yeah, I mean, I think that we'll, you know, we'll be seeing other books of its kind. Which is
very, in today's, the colleges are now teaching music, which is, boy, they didn't do that back in '72.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, look, I do a little of it myself. I mean, I teach in the writing program at the University of Pennsylvania. You know, I live in New York, but I go down to, you know, Philadelphia, you know, one day a week and teach a seminar and do some other stuff there. And, you know, and music is part of what we do. I mean, it's mostly arts writing and kind of arts journalism. You know, I have no problem teaching the writing. I mean, I guess I still, you know, slightly feel funny about, you know, the kind of, you know, university context for a lot of this stuff. I mean, it always strikes me as a little weird, you know, to be listening to stuff that's, I think, in many ways at its heart, so anarchic, you know, within a, you know, a fairly staged structure. but look, I mean, a lot of the accomplishments of these artists, deserve it.
Oh, and be proud of it, Anthony, that you're teaching these kids what they need to know. Be proud of that.
Yeah, so I'm having fun. That's for sure.
As we're talking, my cell phone lit up. It was Jerry Ross, the great producer of Bobby Hebb and Nick Ashford.
Wow.
Because he's going to be on the show, but it's funny that, I see it lighting up and it was Jerry. So I guess he heard us.
Yes, exactly. Bobby did too, maybe.
Oh, Bobby, what a tremendous man. I mean, but...
pretty good singer too, man.
To tour with the Beatles, and, when he did Sonny on stage with the Beatles, it would bring the house down like a Beatles song.
Oh, I could easily imagine that. And I could imagine Lennon just loving that, man.
All the Beatles, I think Ringo really took to Bobby, as he told me. Again, there's so many great stories, and they need not to get lost in the shuffle of time.
Well, I mean, there was that little collection that came out called Lennon's Jukebox.
Don't know it.
Yeah, well, it's like a 2 CD set of stuff that that he had on his jukebox at the Dakota. Yeah, I mean, he had a jukebox, which is pretty great in the first place. But it was all like kind of 50s and early 60s R&B. I mean, that was the stuff he just loved, And Arthur Alexander, people like that.
Did you ever hear of course you must have, the original rock and roll album he did that came out on some like K-Tel label for like 10 years?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, I just love some of that stuff that I don't think it's surfaced on his boxes or anything.
Yeah, no, I know.
Angel,
I'm sure that there are issues with all that.
Be My Baby, great stuff. So John and Paul, there's a John and Paul article in the New York Times. It's rather short. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that little piece, I mean, I included it because, I mean, there's no question. I mean, Bob was very much in the Lennon camp, in the John versus Paul debates. But, I mean, I felt that piece got at something that was, deeper than, essentially the who's your favorite Beatle argument, and that pointed out that even as there were, these issues that came up between these two guys, that there was a very tight bond between them. Often, I think, in particular, Lennon, I mean, liked to pretend that was not so. So, that was the reason for including it. It's as you mentioned, it's a very short piece, but it was it was not what you would expect, I guess, from Bob, and that's one of the reasons I liked it. The other thing is, it sort of reflects my view of their relationship, and you kind of, that's why they call it editing. You gotta you stick your hand in there, and you have your way every now and again.
It's a big responsibility to have someone's work in your hands and be the representative.
Yeah, I mean, you want to do the best you can with it, and you want it to reflect. I mean, I guess I really wanted it to reflect the best qualities of Bob.
Yeah, and if I didn't think it was any good, I wouldn't say anything. But you did a very good job.
Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate that.
No, you really have. Boy, I'm excited. Some Girls is coming up because the Stones have kind of lost me. The new albums just go right through me.
Yeah, well, there might not be any more of those. So
really,
I think though that some of this older stuff, there's certainly plenty to do there.
And maybe a current box set. Now that Uni has the catalog of well, there really hasn't been a proper Rolling Stones box set. Maybe now's the time.
Yeah. I mean, if they can get some of the issues. I mean, to get a career box set, they'd have to resolve a lot of stuff. But, I remember I did the liner notes for that Rolling Stones singles collection that APCO put out. And I remember talking to Alan Klein about it, and he said, well, the Rolling Stones have contacted me about, they said, we'd like to license, the stuff that you have, for a box set. And he goes, I just said, well, why don't you license your stuff to me and I'll put out the box set. You know, so I don't know if those issues are persisting. I mean, Alan died a few years ago, and
Right.
you know, Jody's a little more. I think, you know, he's kind of somebody I think who wants to be a peacemaker. So, you know, let's keep our fingers crossed.
I get the same impression. You know that they have mocked up a box set. Are you aware of that?
I did not know that, no.
I was over at Rob Fraboni's house, and there's like 5 copies in existence, and he threw it in my lap, and I'm like, oh my God, I want to go home with this.
Wow.
And I'm looking through it, and I didn't know the titles, Anthony, and I thought I knew the titles, you know? And I'm like, this is delicious.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so they have, you know, Mick and Keith and Rob have mocked up something, and they've got it, and they're looking at it. So I don't think was for, I don't know. No one told me I couldn't say anything, so there you go.
There it is.
Maybe Anthony DeCurtis will be writing the liners.
Oh, let's only hope.
That would be, you're the guy. You're the guy. Anything else on the book on Scribner? It's SimonandSchuster.com. Blues and Chaos, the music writings of Robert Palmer. Anything else that you...
No, I think we've about covered it, man.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun talking to you today on this.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it, and you know, your enthusiasm has been very heartening to me.
It's great. It's a great job, and I just appreciate it, man.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you, Anthony.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's Anthony DeCurtis. Great editing job on this really wonderful keeper. And you don't hear me go nuts over books, but it's got all my favorite stuff in it. John Lennon, Yoko Ono, John Cale, Lou Reed, Patti Smith. So I can devour this from piecemeal. I like I told Suzanne Vega when she was here on the set, I like being able to dive into a book and not have to read it from front to back because it's not a big project. Thanks, and have a good day.